All right, thanks a lot for everyone for coming. My name is Matt Kleiman, and I'm a software engineer and a manager at Pivotal Labs in Washington, D.C. in the United States. Pivotal Labs is a consulting company, so I'm a software consultant, and I work directly with my clients. They come to our office, and we pair 8 hours a day on real engineering problems that they have to help enable them. Today, I'm going to talk about, like the thesis of my talk is why I think it's critical that each and every one of us seeks out work environments that nourish our strengths as human beings. You'll notice the note cards here. I have ADD and some other learning disabilities. So please just mind the note cards. It's my way of coping with public speaking. So let's talk a little bit about ADD. Attention deficit disorder, sometimes ADHD, you may have heard. All of these, they fall into a category of executive functioning disorders. So an executive functioning disorder is basically affects the CEO that lives inside of all of our brains, in the frontal lobe. This is the part of our brain that analyzes and then plans out tasks. It then makes decisions, and then it tells the body or the brain to carry them out. Now, as someone with ADD, I'm perfectly capable of all of those things I just described. However, I often do them in the wrong order. You may have heard ADD traditionally defined by distractedness, people having difficulty focusing on things, on one task, maybe like running in a million directions. I think that it's often, especially when we look at children in schools, it's often looked at in a very kind of negative light of like, this is a problem that needs to be solved. But we can also look at it as a gift. You know, my non-linear style of thinking leads to great bouts of creativity. I have very good interpersonal intuition. My ability to understand people in ways that most people may not have understood them is evident in my daily life. My extreme exuberance about things that I get passionate about, such as talking about this topic, and my natural curiosity. These all come from the same deficits that I've just described in that executive functioning disorder. So I was diagnosed with ADD in 5th grade. So I looked that up online, and I think that's UK year 6. My parents, so I was a pretty high achieving student, and my parents were both public school teachers. They were both teachers who were paid by the government. I understand there's a discrepancy between my American English talk and trying to bring it here. So they had worked with a lot of students who had ADD, and so they were noticing signs of that in me. Even though I was still functioning well in school on paper, I was struggling to achieve at the same level as my peers, and putting in a lot of effort. And so we went through the standard thing like psychological testing, and it proved, and also like a historical testing of like what, how I've responded over the years in different situations, so on. And that's how a diagnosis of ADD should be received. And through that, the psychiatrist recommended certain accommodations that the schools could provide for me, such as note-taking. The teachers provided me notes at the end of class so that I could fully pay attention to what was being said instead of having to record that myself, where I would lose information in the process of trying to record it. And I was given extra time on tests and certain kinds of assignments because I had coping mechanisms that the therapist had given me that required extra time for me to utilize those coping mechanisms. So these accommodations, they worked great. I was able to succeed. I did well in school. And I didn't have to kill myself to get there. Now, the accommodations continued through university because the laws provided for accommodating for students all the way through university. And then I graduated from college, and I had no more accommodations. I'm out in the real world. Nobody cares that I have ADD. Now, fortunately, my first job out of college was actually a really good fit for me. I was working as at Logan Hardware, which is a hardware store, just like a local hardware store. We sold nails and screws and wood, plumbing supplies, that kind of thing. And it was a really good job for me because I was able to help customers every day, very hands-on. It was interactive work. I had very small, manageable tasks. Someone comes in, they need some help them for 5 minutes, and then they're done. That task is over. And they are driving that task. If I am going in the wrong direction, they're going to tell me. I was also able to use my communication skills and grow that of how to work with people. And I really enjoyed that job a lot. But eventually, I wanted to get into the tech field. So I had gone to school for computer engineering, and I enjoyed programming quite a bit. So I wanted to actually get in a tech job. And I also wanted to make more money. And the retail field wasn't quite as lucrative as tech in the United States. So that started a series of my accepting job after job of absolutely the wrong fit for who I am. So let's talk about some of these. I was working at a finance company in New York City, and I was the only person on my team in the United States. My boss was in Dublin, and the rest of our team was in India and the Philippines. Now, I really enjoyed working with this team, but I only got to really work with them for 2 hours a day. And so I lost out on the interpersonal communication, interpersonal intuition. I couldn't know from emails how people were feeling about the decisions that I was making, and I felt very isolated in that job. I also didn't have a lot of face time with anyone, so my exuberance wasn't there to be able to say hey, this is fun. Let's talk about this. Another job I had after that was I started a company it was just a small startup, me and another person, and I was the technical co-founder. And because it was just the two of us, it was essentially I had all of these CEO-like tasks to fall upon me to analyze, plan, delineate, and then execute. Exactly the things that I described earlier that I am not very effective at doing in the right order. So again, I had put myself into a position where I wasn't set up for success. And finally, I was working at the Park Slope Food Co-op, which is a food cooperative is a grocery store that is owned and operated by members. You must be a member in order to shop there. And all of the members work for 3 hours every month in order to keep that membership. They may bag groceries or are putting stuff on the shelves or whatever. Or in my case, I was a full-time employee. I was a full-time employee, and I was helping. I was building the website. I was a web developer, the sole web developer. So it fell upon me again, to manage all of these tasks, be a product manager, a product designer, product developer, as well as a project manager, because now I have a staff full of people who are willing to work 3 hours every month. When I left that job, I really had enough of just like stumbling into job after job. And I needed to do something different. So I took a look at my past, and what I now understand in the world of Agile is a retrospective on my life. And in that retrospective, I saw what some of the things that were really good experiences for me, and some of the things that I really needed to change about these jobs. And I also looked back to the hardware store and said, like, what was it about that job that was so good that gave me such satisfaction and allowed me to succeed? And the action item that came to the top of the list was like, I want to try an experiment. Again, I had never done Agile, I'd never done lean startup, but I'm like, I want to do an experiment. I want to collaborate with people. I don't want to be isolated anymore. In fact, I want to collaborate so much, I want to do it all day, every day. I want to try pair programming, which I had never done before. So I went on the internet and I found what's the best place to do pair programming, and it turns out that was Pivotal Labs. And I went to the interview, and I was pair programming for an entire day, for 8 hours, on real client projects. That's their interview process. And I left that interview utterly exhausted, having fully used all of my capabilities that entire day. But I was so, so happy at the end of the day. I was working there within a few weeks. So what is pair programming? At its highest level, for those of you who didn't raise your hand before, pair programming just means you have two engineers working together at the same time to solve one problem. Everything else is just ergonomics. We like to put 2 monitors, 2 mice, 2 keyboards, and have them attached to one computer so that you don't have 2 engineers scrunched on a laptop together. The idea behind pair programming comes from extreme programming. And as a consultant, I espouse, as a pivotal consultant, I espouse these values every day to my clients, to my customers. And I could share the business value, like why we should do pair programming, how great it is. So for example, it provides instant code review. There's no need to do code review anymore when you're doing pair programming. Not only do you already have 2 eyes on every bit of code, 2 pairs of eyes on every bit of code, but you also have 2 pairs of brains, 2 brains have worked on every bit of code together. So you really tighten the feedback loop of code reviews. When me and my pair have finished our work, we commit that code directly to master, and we're done. That code can get into production, ship it. Another business value that you get is pair rotation and context. So when you have a team that's pairing every day, let's say we have 6 engineers, so 3 pairs. We will be rotating our pairs every day. So today I'm pairing with Sally, tomorrow I'll pair with Joe. If by the end of the week, I will have paired with everyone on the team, and everyone on the team, by 2 weeks, will have worked on every possible story type within the application. Now you have a team of 6 engineers who could work on anything in the application. And that comes to the last point, which is that Agile teams should be able to do exactly what is next and most important at any moment in time. Take an example of a team that doesn't do pair programming. You've got Joe, who specializes in all of the database stories. And I specialize in the front-end stories. And Sally prefers to work in the back-end stories. We are siloed in this way. Now the product managers and the product designers have gone out to the users and they've discovered a new feature that must be done immediately. Because we are an agile team, we will get on that right away. That's now the highest priority. It's the top of the backlog. Oh, but Joe is the only one who's not working on anything. And that's a front-end story. Sorry, Joe can't work on it because Joe hasn't been working in the front end. However, if this was a pair programming team, an extreme programming team, whoever's free, whichever pair is free, should be able to work on that story. And the product manager can guarantee that. But I'm also here to talk about not just the business value of pair programming, but like why has pair programming been so powerful a tool for me as someone with learning disabilities. I have found pairing to be like a natural coping mechanism for my ADD. So I am communicating constantly with my pair. That is just how we work. And if I start to veer off, distraction is very easy for my brain. If I start to veer off, my pair is naturally going to say, like, hey, like that's not what we're working on. So now I'm accountable for another person, and they're accountable to me. And they're going to tell me, like, yeah, I think that's not what we're working on right now. But it's not just to prevent me, to keep me in my lane. It's also to help. Hey, that's not what we're working on right now, but that's a really interesting idea. Let's write it down and come back to it later. So we're keeping the value of that creativity of the nonlinear brain, but still able to do our core function of delivering features. And the last thing is this thing called metacognition. In modern theory around executive functioning disorders, there's this idea that we can utilize metacognition, which is simply thinking about thinking, to help people with executive functioning disorders grow the amount of their brain, or like kind of grow the muscle of their brain that that isn't working in the way that the neurotypical world wants us to be working. So what does this mean? It means that I give an example of how it happens for me in pair programming. So when I'm working alone, I am on my computer, an idea comes into my head. That's one part of my brain. And then I transfer that idea to the second part of my brain that allows me to type that into code on the machine. Two parts of my brain have been activated through that transaction. Now let's switch to that same scenario in a pairing world. The idea comes into my head, and now I transfer it to the part of my brain that converts things to speech, because it's just rude to type without talking to your pair. I need to tell her what I am working on, what am I thinking about, so I can get feedback. So I talk to her. I say, this is what I'm thinking about. And I look at her, third part of my brain, visual. I look at her and try to understand her body language to say, does she like what I'm thinking about? Is she skeptical? And then I'm listening to her, fourth part of my brain. What is she actually saying? Does she say she's skeptical of what I've done? Or does she say, like, yeah, that's a great idea, but like, let's change the variable name to something else? Okay, now I come back, and fifth part of my brain to type it into the computer. So my whole brain is being activated. And this is happening all day, every day, simply by doing my job the way I'm supposed to at Pivotal. Let's talk about another core practice that we have at Pivotal that has helped me tremendously, test-driven development. For those of you at the lightning talks yesterday, I talked briefly about this as well. So let's first say, who here has who here knows what TDD is? Oh, excellent. Okay. That's most of the audience. Who here has done test-driven development? Okay, like a little more than half. Who here does test-driven development 100% of the time? Excellent. I like you, sir. All right, we had one hand up for that. All right, so in that case, real briefly, test-driven development is simply we write our tests, we write automated tests to assert the behavior that we want the users to have in our application. We write those tests first. They fail gloriously because we haven't written any code. And then we write some code, just enough to get it done, to get the test to pass. And later we get to cleaning up that code once we have a few tests that assert some like good behavior of what we're looking for. So I'll briefly go through what I talked about in Lightning Talk of why we do test-driven development from a business perspective. We want teams that go fast forever. I want an Agile team, every single Agile team, to have a consistent velocity every week forever. And it's definitely possible. They need to be able to adapt to the changing landscape of the product and still retain that consistent velocity. How do we get that? They need to have clean code. If the code base is clean, then the team will be able to adapt to any change that the product managers, any story the product manager asks for. Well, how do they get that clean code? Refactoring. Constantly refactoring. We need to be refactoring every single day. Every time we make a commit, we should be thinking about leaving that code base a little bit cleaner than before we got in that day. Now, the biggest problem with refactoring is that, and I'll just give the definition here. Refactoring is changing the code base in some way without impacting the user's experience in any way. And so what developers are most afraid of is refactoring and changing the user's behavior. That would introduce like a regression to the system. So we need some way to give them complete confidence that whatever they're changing hasn't impacted the user negatively. How do we get that confidence? Well, we can easily get that if we have a beautiful test suite, automated tests that tell us with a click of a button that the entire application is working exactly as planned. And from this argument, I would say tests should absolutely be done first. They're the most important thing. The tests tell us that the application is working properly. And so that's why we do test-driven development. We start with the tests. And we can throw out the code if we want, because we can always rewrite the code from the tests. But that's the business case. Boring, right? Like that's what I would tell to the CTO of the organization, like why you should be having all your teams do test-driven development. But test-driven development has saved my career. And that's what I really want to talk to you about today. I lived in fear of distractions my entire life, as a kid, as an adult in my previous jobs, because distraction is a way of life for me, and I don't know how to control that. I've tried things. I have put on 15-minute timers, and every time the timer goes off, I'll say, oh, am I working on the thing I'm supposed to be working on? And that has its own problem, because maybe I was working on the thing I'm supposed to be working on. But then the timer went off, and it made me think, oh, you know what would be nice? I could have tea right now. But these kinds of mechanisms, coping mechanisms that I've used over the years, none of them ever really helped me. Until I found test-driven development. Nowadays, not only are distractions okay, I actually welcome them into my life. I'll give you an example of how this works. So I now at Pivotal am often like effectively like the lead engineer on a team. And so a lot of people will want to come to me to ask me questions. I tend to have like the most context. So they're coming to me with questions. So I'll be working on something with my pair, and someone comes and bothers us. No problem, we'll go help that person. But we can come back to the code base and simply run all the tests and see which test is failing. Oh, that's where we were working last. No problem, we're back into the work. And the same thing, it's allowed me to become, to grow into the role of a manager at Pivotal. Something I never thought I would be capable of doing. Because now, when I have a one-on-one that I need to go to, I can go to that meeting, come back, and I have the test suite to tell me exactly where I left off. This natural scaffolding of this test suite, of this test-driven development process, this discipline, has allowed me to completely change how I work. So much so that I no longer need to take medication to help me with the ADD. I used to take Ritalin or Adderall or things like this, which completely changed how I think and actually like reduced my creativity and exuberance and all the things I was talking about before. And now I can keep all of those things and still be a productive employee. So things really like clicked for me at Pivotal working in this way. You know, my way of thinking, it matched the way that we were working at Pivotal. This very scientific graph of like my time at Pivotal shows like how much happier I've been over the years and how I've been able to succeed, why I've been able to succeed. Like I said, growing into roles of like leadership within teams, leadership within an office, and so on. Things I honestly don't think I would have been able to do at any other point in my career on the trajectory I had been on. See, if the core function of your work is a struggle, then your work life, maybe your whole life, will be unmanageable. That's what I've learned. The core function of my work is to deliver features to users, to write code. And when I was doing that alone, it was a struggle. But now, that part of my work is not a struggle. And my life is very manageable. I'm able to thrive. These inadvertent accommodations of pair programming and test-driven development, they help make me more like everyone else, where I only struggle with some of the things, and actually can allow me to work on other things, like management and leadership, where I certainly struggle with many more things, but I wouldn't be able to like take on those challenges if it weren't for the fact that my core work is not a struggle. This has leveled the playing field for me. And the interesting thing is that Pivotal didn't create this for me. They created this 30 years ago with the extreme programming movement. I sought these measures out because, and this is coming back to the thesis of what I wanted to share with you all today, I really think it's critical that we as employees seek out work environments that nourish our strengths and where we are completely valued for all of our strengths. And that doesn't necessarily mean leaving to another environment. I think that's something that I had to do. But it might mean helping make change within the culture of your work environment to help nourish your own strengths and work with your teams, work with your leadership, work with your company. But just keep that in mind of like know yourself and strive to nourish your strengths. I want to leave with one last story before we take some questions. I think that it's really important that we talk a little bit about empathy before I leave you all today. So this last story is actually about me and my wife, so I'll happily embarrass her today. So we went to a workshop that was for couples where one person in the couple had ADD to help the couple cope with that. If it hasn't been apparent for you, I am the person in our couple that has ADD. So in the workshop, the speaker was asking us to write down a list of traits that we appreciated about our partner, and then on the other side, a list of traits that we found annoying. So and then draw a line from traits that we appreciate to traits that we find annoying. So for example, my wife wrote that she really appreciates that I am good at figuring out how things work. Very nice of her. But she finds it very annoying that I like to touch everything, as evidenced by how much I've been touching the microphone. So this comes into play when we are hiring a car at the airport. So we will, get to Enterprise and get into the car, and I will spend like 10 minutes in the garage fiddling with the buttons and looking at the user manual, pairing my phone to the car, trying to figure out how the radio works, all of that. And she's getting like more and more frustrated as the minutes go by. She's like, we just want to get on the road. I just want to get to wherever we're going. But half an hour later, we're on the road, and she's like squirming in her seat, trying to figure out how to adjust the seat so that she can be comfortable. And then finally she says like, I can't get this seat working. And I say, oh yeah, you just got to press that button over there. Because I've already like spent the time like figuring that out. And it's at that moment that she really appreciates that I'd been curious and spent that time like touching everything, right? So the point of this story, as it pertains to our very close-knit Agile teams, is that we rely heavily on each other's strengths. That's what makes these teams propel forward. And the beauty of our teams, our diverse teams, hopefully our neurodiverse teams, is that we approach problems very differently, each of us. But that can be very frustrating. And we have to remember what's frustrating in one moment may actually be an asset in a different situation. We all have unique ways of thinking, and let's just all like take a breath next time we get a little bit frustrated and try to remember that this thing that's frustrating us about another person may be something that really benefits us or the team at another time. All right, that's all I have for you today, and I'll have about 10 minutes for some questions. Thank you very much.